Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Stretch Professor, and today we're going to be doing a tier list for 10.14 for support. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Be sure to check out the rest of the offerings as well. We stream every night starting around 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually till about 4 or 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time till 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. I try to explain as much as I can about what's going on in the game, some of my decisions, some of the alternative choices that our team could have made or the enemy team could have made. And I just try to hold just fun conversations about random topics with people in the chat as well. So it's a really good, fun time, whether you just want to chill and hang out or whether you're trying to learn a little bit, ask some questions, and see a different perspective on the league. Then we also offer individual champion guides, coaching sessions, patch notes, other tier lists, topical guides like how to macro better, how to micro better, one tricking, is it good, is it bad, who should you one trick, there's almost any topic you can think of. We probably have a video on it, and we're constantly adding more, so check out all that. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. Now you can find access to this Google Doc in the description if you'd like, if you want the TLDR version, and then for each one of these top 15 entries, if you just click on it, it'll take you to another mini Google Doc, and here I'll leave you a link to the wiki, which tells you more information about the champion. I also have a rating system 1 to 5, 1 being the champion is one of the worst for a support for whatever that task is, 5 being the champion is one of the best for that task. So lane pressure is just how likely are you able to push and get priority in the lane. Kill threat, how likely are you able to cause kills during the laning phase. Safety is how safe are you, particularly from early ganks. Scaling is how well does the champion perform over time. And then reliability is how likely is it that someone can be consistent with this champion over time, so they can win over many different games. And part of that is how well does the champion fit into the meta? Are they good with current picks? Are they countered by current picks that are popular in the meta? And also just how hard is the champion to play in terms of mechanics and in terms of the decisions that you have to make. How many games will you have to play to get really proficient on the champion? Then I have recommended runes and recommended items. And as always, if you want to shorten the video, you can just click on that little cog in the bottom right of YouTube, turn it up to 1.25 or 1.5x. If you want to make the video go even faster, you can probably still understand most of what I'm saying. Okay, so let's just really quickly start off with, and I'll have timestamps in the description as well if you just want to click around to your favorite parts. Okay, so let's start off with just a really quick meta overview, because that's going to apply to a lot of the champions that I'm going to recommend down here. And I used to have this section in past tier lists, but I ended up doing away with it. But I'm going to bring it back for this one because we've been shifting towards this for a while, and I talk about this all the time. People ask about it a ton on the channel. What do you think about engaged supports? Why do you think enchanters are so good right now? And I think this shift has been happening pretty much all season, especially starting late last season when Soraka really rose to power in November. It was that far back. I was recommending it for a really long time. She had a 54-55% win rate. A lot of high-end players didn't catch on to Soraka until January or February before she got sort of nerfed and reworked. But either way, so this has been an ongoing trend for a while, but it's continuing to accelerate, and people are finally starting to catch on, and you're seeing it reflected in pick rates. Enchanters have had really high win rates, but now people are picking them more. So what is contributing to this? Why do I think that enchanters are so strong? Well, part of it is just the itemization, and I've talked about this a lot in the past. So be sure to check out some of my itemization videos. I might have a new one just to refresh people on that coming out over the next week or so. But if you weren't around for Season 7, that was the Ardent Sensor meta that everyone, complains about a lot of the time. I thought it was great. That's basically where enchanters are meta at really high-end play. So challenger and even in a pro play, enchanters are good. And a big part of that is around this item, Ardent Sensor, which basically is just crazy cost efficient. You're going to end up getting 200% efficiency out of this. And what this means is if you pay 2,300 gold for an item that's 200% efficient, then you basically get a free 2,300 gold on the house. So it's like you're giving your team an extra 7 or 8 kills worth of gold just by buying that item. And enchanters have several items that are like that. You have Ardent Sensor and Athenes. Both of those are 200+% in the mid game. And then you have stuff like Redemption, which depends on how well you use the active. It's a little bit less reliable than Ardent and Athenes, but very often it's also over 200%. So they just have really, really good scaling because of that. And people don't think of champions like Lulu and Soraka and Janna as scaling, because people usually think of scaling as damage. But healing and shielding is also really, really good, and it's very powerful and very difficult to deal with. That's why there's an entire stat dedicated to countering it with grievous wounds on a bunch of different items. And the big thing that makes shields so strong in particular, and you'll see several shielding type of champs up near the top, is because shields aren't affected by grievous wounds. First of all, so they bypass that counterplay that Riot has put into the game. And then secondly, shields also scale with resistances. So if you give someone a 300 shield and they have 100 armor, then it's going to take 600 physical damage to break that shield. That's different from a lot of games out there. A lot of other games, the shield basically always takes what we would call in League true damage. It doesn't benefit from armor, it doesn't benefit from magic resist, but it does in League of Legends. So just keep that in mind, that when you're seeing some of these numbers on these champs, it may not look that crazy. It's like, okay, Janna's just putting a 400 shield on somebody, but if you take into account if she's shielding, a Darius that has 100 armor, it's going to take a lot of damage to crack that shield. So you have really efficient itemization on enchanters. That's always been true. But then recently there have been buffs, particularly to Guardian, that are making it very hard to kill the enchanter, so they're able to protect other people with that shield, but now they can protect themselves. If you take Aerie, which is still possible on some of the champs out there, it does provide some really nice poke in the lane with Aerie plus Scorch, but you also have the option of taking Guardian. So if you're against an all-in type of champion, a Nautilus, a Leona, or some of the assassins out there, if you're playing someone like a Lulu and you end up taking Guardian and Bone Plating and Conditioning, well, I guess you have to pick either Conditioning or Bone Plating, but you take some of those, and then you combine that with taking Boots of Swiftness, which allows you to rotate around faster. It makes it much more difficult for people to stick to you. Then it becomes really difficult to assassinate you, especially if you end up taking Barrier as well, which people more and more are realizing. That's been common on Soraka, but on more and more champs out there, if you just want to go for a scaling comp, if you have scaling superiority, you can take Barrier on some of the riskier enchanters like Soraka and make them extremely difficult to kill. So that's just part of it. Is the scaling has always been really good, but the damage is dropping off a little bit in some of the other roles. People aren't picking as aggressive of picks as they have in the past, and you're getting some more survivability, primarily with Guardian, Bone Plating, Boots of Swiftness, and Nimbus Cloak. If you're getting the sorcery tree either as your primary or your secondary, you can take Nimbus Cloak, and people are realizing just how powerful that is. That extra movement speed makes it very, very difficult to run you down. So it's highly likely you're going to get out of a situation if you flash, because you're going to get like a little mini ghost right after that. Or even if you barrier or exhaust or whatever, you're getting that extra movement speed. So Nimbus Cloak also makes it much harder to kill people. So there's just been a lot more stuff in the game that has added a bunch more resilience, and that means that enchanters are better, because the longer a fight lasts, the better enchanters are going to be, because they're going to really just beat you over the head with their numbers, because they have such high scaling. Enchanters absolutely do not want burst fights where people are dying in like 1 second. That is the kind of meta enchanters hate, because then you can't cast enough heals and shields to really make your stats worth it. It's just all about the burst damage. But once the fight starts slowing down, once you start getting those 5 to 10 second fights at least, and sometimes longer, that's when enchanters really start to shine. Okay, now part of this also, the slowdown, is coming into tanky junglers. So a lot of the tanky champs are coming up a little bit. You've seen stuff like Conquer getting nerfed, which makes the tanks a little bit stronger by comparison, and they've done several changes like that to the items and runes this season to make tanks a lot more appealing, along with direct buffs to some specific tanks like Volibear, like Nunu. So you're seeing these tanky junglers, the Nunu, the Volibear, and Kayn are in there as well. And why is that good? Like I just said, with healing and shielding, the more resistances someone has, the better the healing and shielding lasts. Not only because it takes that much more to counteract, right? If you have the 300 shield, take 600 physical damage to kill them, but also just because they're going to have a ton of health and healing and shielding themselves, and that's going to make the fights last longer, so you're going to get off more shields. So the shields are more impactful, and you're going to get more of them off over time. So tanks are just extremely good with enchanters, and often they can kind of clog up the front lines and make it a lot more difficult for people to dive you, to get on you if you're a Soraka or a Lulu or a Janna on the back line. So tanks and enchanters just go peanut butter and jelly, together. They're really, really powerful together in traditional team fights. And then tanky top lanes, you're seeing that as well, especially with like Garen, Darius, Wukong, Volibear up there, same deal. You're getting a bunch of stuff that's really hard to kill. It's going to make enchanters better. And specifically with stuff like the Volibear, Kayn, Darius, Garen, all that stuff, if you can get an enchanter that also gives out a bunch of extra movement speed, so like a Yuumi, a Karma, or a Lulu, that's really good because that's going to allow them to stick on the enemy a lot better. And so you're just going to have this kind of unstoppable force of healing, shielding, and tankiness just barreling at them. And it's really hard for enemies to do a lot of stuff about that right now if you have that kind of comp and they don't. Also, you don't have as much burden on Engage in the support role right now because other people are playing Engage and playing these tanky champions. Zac is another one who's really popular. So if you can just, if you're playing Karma or something, for example, and you can just boost up the Volibear who's running at somebody, you don't need to play Leona or Nautilus because that Volibear can start the fight for you. Versus in previous metas where you saw a lot more damage-oriented junglers, where you were seeing a lot more Graves, you're seeing a lot more Kha'Zix, Rek'Sai, there's those type of like heavy damage champs, then it was much more beneficial to run the Leona, to run the Nautilus, just to make sure that you had a high probability of engage. And the same is true of top laners. You just weren't seeing that many engaged top laners, so now that you're seeing a bit more of that, it's nice. Similar to that, we're also seeing a lot more healing in general. So you got Conquer, Triumph, Bloodline in that tree, Ravenous Hunter, Taste of Blood, Death's Dance is the really big new one. And then Blade of the Ruined King was buffed also, so Death's Dance and Blade of the Ruined King. And a lot of those champions also want to take Spirit Visage, and many of them have innate healing as well. So if you think of Kayn, Volibear, Darius, Nunu, a lot of those champs, they have healing in their kit and shielding in their kit. And often they will get some combination of a lot of those different runes. So the healing is just off the charts. It's ridiculous. And so once again, the longer fights go, the better it is for enchanters. So more healing makes your healing even better, your shielding even better, ironically. You kind of can't have enough of a good thing in that sense, just because, fights go longer. That means you're going to win if you're playing the enchanter. So that's very, very good for them. Now, that does mean that people are getting grievous wounds a lot more, so, you're not going to be able to sneak away with games with Soraka a lot of the times where people just don't get grievous wounds because it's just going to happen because you're going to have a Kayn, a Volibear, or something like that. So the enemies aren't going out of their way to build the grievous wounds. But nevertheless, it does make the grievous wounds a little bit less effective if you have just an overwhelming abundance of healing, because it's just too much. The fights are still going to last for a long time, and even if you're getting your healing cut by 40%, you're still going to be able to crush them. ADCs are also like coming up a little bit in power, and the types of ADCs that we're seeing are going to be really strong. So like Ashe in particular is getting very strong right now. So once again, she has good engage. So that means you don't need the engage as much as the support. It's nice, but you don't have to have it. If Ashe just hits an arrow with somebody and you just buff her up with Lulu, you're probably going to be able to blow them up and kill them. Right? And so the nerf to some of these utility ADCs that are doing the poking, like your Varus, your Ezreal, stuff like that, they're still popular, they're still strong, but you're seeing more of these auto-attack ADCs that benefit really heavily with Ardent Sensor and with other things that give extra attack speed, like Lulu's W, like Yuumi's E, like Janna's E. So all of this means it's going to be really, really good for kind of the Ardent Sensor meta. And because it is slowing down, they're going to have more time to land those auto attacks, right? They're going to get to sit there, and auto attack 10 times to kill a tank rather than have to burst out the assassin that's running at them in half a second or they're going to die, right? Like the Misfortune or the Jhin that was really popular earlier on in the season. Now, Jhin is still pretty popular, but the auto attack, longer fights, just kiting, positioning, those types of ADCs are going to be a lot stronger right now. Then you also had direct nerfs to things like Leona and Nautilus, specifically their damage. So it's just a lot harder to kill them in the early game. So they just do less damage, but then there's also Guardian, Bone Plating, all that other stuff that I just mentioned. Okay, well, that was a long time on the meta, but hopefully that sets it up for you. I don't want this video to be super long, so I'm just going to go through a few of these picks here really quickly and just kind of let you know what I think about them. Okay, so I think Lulu probably is number one right now overall. This is debatable. I mean, it kind of depends on the situation and what's going on. I think that all of these picks in the tier 1 are kind of different variations of the same type of thing. It just depends on what your team needs and what your pick order is. If you're a later pick and you can see, okay, they don't have very much hard engage, then Soraka might be the better choice. But if you're just a blind pick, then something like Lulu might be a little bit better just because she can buff up and play the late game, but she can also has pretty good game against Engage with her ultimate with Polymorph against Engage and Assassins. So I think Lulu is just really good right now. She does have some good push with her Q early on. She has good harassment combo with her E plus Q. She does buff up the ADC. She has the best, probably, single target buffs on an ADC of any of the enchanters, and the big part of that is her W gives movement speed and 45% attack speed, and then if you put your E on somebody, then it also gives you effectively on hit with the picks. It's on attack technically, but it's basically every auto attack, you know, in the mid game. Once you get one item, either Ardent Censer or Athene's, usually Ardent Censer is what you want to rush, then you're doing an extra 80 damage per hit, which is about 2,000 gold worth of damage. So that's extremely powerful on Lulu. Once you get the Ardent for the attack speed buff, the extra on-hit damage, you give them the picks, you give them the W for the movement speed, the attack speed, and they pop whatever steroids they have in their kit, you're going to be able to blow some people up. So that's extremely strong, especially on champions that naturally are going to buy a lot of attack speed and that have on-hit damage, either with Blather and King or Manamune, which is a lot of the ADCs out there right now, and who have some other type of on-hit effects, whether that's Kai'Sa's passive or Twitch's poison or Vayne Silver Bolts or whatever. All that stuff just works extremely well together, and that's part of why Lulu's really good. But she also kind of has a nice plan B with her ultimate. It gives you a lot of resilience against assassins. It's great to put on bruisers as well, things like the Darius, the Nunu, stuff like that, because you get that little bit of knockup and it gives them some sticking power. It has a 30% AoE slow for 7 seconds whenever you cast that on somebody, and it's on a very low cooldown for 110 seconds, so you can cast it very often, which is handy. Now, she also has a movement speed steroid, which we just talked about before. The W not only gives a really big buff to your AD carry potentially, but you can cast that on the Darius, the Nunu, the Wukong, or whatever, and that allows them to run up, chase people, get those really good engages. So she works very well with engage comps too. You just W, have them run in. As soon as they jump in there, you ult them, boom, knock them up. It's an extra piece of CC to the chain, and you can kill them that way. So that's going to be really handy. And you can also use the W as a polymorph. So it's like a triple threat. If they do have a really fed assassin, they have a Katarina or an Echo or a Diana, you can CC him for 2.25 seconds with one ability on your W. That is massive. So you can ult to, you know, stop the assassin from immediately blowing up whoever they're jumping on, and then you just polymorph them and they're probably going to die. So she just kind of has a little something for everybody in her kit. Historically, one of the weaker aspects of Lulu's kit is she doesn't have a heal in the laning phase, so if she does get poked out by things like Xerath, like Varus, Ezreal, Vel'Koz, you know, Lux, any kind of poke support can be problematic for her in the early game if she gets low, as it can be sort of hard to get out of that. And she's really slow, so she only has, I think, 330 movement speed, so if you aren't able to W yourself to get the extra movement, then that can be pretty rough. Now, I will say that Boots of Swiftness are what I highly recommend on her. I know some people still get Ionian. She does have kind of longer cooldowns, especially on her W, and it is very impactful. But Swiftness are just so helpful. Having that extra movement speed, that extra 30 movement speed or whatever it gives, is a very big deal because that means you don't have to use your W on yourself to reposition. So you can help other people reposition with a W or polymorph or whatever you want to do with it. So that just frees you up quite a bit. And then Guardian also helps protect you against all ends and protect other people to extend the fights. Because if you have Guardian, plus you shield them, plus you ult them, and you polymorph the person, it's going to be almost impossible to burst out a single target against her. So she's really, really good in the meta overall right now. And I have started taking biscuits and then boots with her because you don't really want to roam a ton early. She's not great at it. She's okay. But the boots does, if you do get the free boots, that means you can put that 300 gold towards Ardent Censer to get it even faster. Because that's such a massive power spike on Lulu when you get Ardent. You get Ardent plus all of the rest of her kit, you're easily going to be able to crush people in those early to mid-game team fights. So I think all of that together makes her really, really strong right now. And having those biscuits helps out a ton with the early game fights as well. If you are playing at something that does a lot of poke early, you can take Second Wind. And you're going to get the biscuits and the potions early on. So that can help you through quite a few tricky matchups during the laning phase. So I think that Lulu is positioned very well right now. She has the highest PBI right now on League of on Analytics, and what that is the pick ban influence. So this is a new stat that they came up with here, which basically means it's a combination of how often is the champion picked, how often are they banned, and how high is their win rate. The higher all of those are, means that people think that this is a very influential and powerful pick, and it's reflected in their win rates. So something that, has a 17% pick rate and a 20% ban rate like Lulu and a high win rate usually indicates that something's super strong versus, other stuff that might be really niche out there that you don't see that often, like Teemo support, for example, that not only has a 42% win rate but also is only picked, a very small amount. Or even, like, what's an example of something that has an okay win rate that's just not, it's just, like, really obscure? Something like Talia, for example, which has a 53.5% win rate, but it's only picked, less than 0.25% of the time, and it's never banned. It's like, how strong is that really? There's not a very big sample size for that, and it's not threatening enough where people are banning it all the time. So, anyways, I think that makes the case for her being really strong right now. Karma is another one that I think is sneaking up quite a bit. And she is kind of good with some of the champions that are still popular that, I mean, she can work with almost anyone, but she's good with these poke champs specifically. So if you get something like Ezreal specifically is really good, because sometimes, like, Ardent Sensor is pretty good, but it's not as amazing on Ezreal as it is on other ADCs. But if you can just push and put them under tower, you just Q that backline with the ranged minions pretty much every wave with Karma. Just throw one Q on there, see if you can harass the enemy, but really just push them in. You can get the priority to poke them if you want to with Ezreal Karma under tower, or you can go rotate, get scuttles, get deeper vision in the jungle, try to make a play on mid lane, get a preferable back timing. You can just do all sorts of things with that extra pressure in the bottom lane. So I really like that about Karma, that she is high pressure, she is high poke, but she also scales really well later on into the game because her shield not only is a pretty high quality shield, I think it's like 200 base shield, but it also gives 60% movement speed for a second and a half, which is a really big amount of movement speed. And it's just a really big, if she uses her ult plus the shield, it ends up being 500 plus shield later on in the game that is basically on like a 15-second cooldown. As long as you're consistently auto-attacking and queuing people in team fights, you can probably cast it twice. So it's a really high impact shield that can actually give a really big shield to the rest of your team as well, because the rest of your team's going to get a third of that. So if you have 3 teammates that are clumped up in a team fight, you can put the big shield on one of them for 500, for example, and then it's going to give a third of that to the other people. So maybe like, 175 or so to 2 other people next to it, and that's going to be, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 shield. So it's a really, really powerful protection. She also has a very good guaranteed gank assist, so if a gank's coming in and you just shield yourself to run up and close the gap and then just W on somebody, they're not going to be able to get out of that unless they flash, and you can flash after them to make sure that they're not going to get out, and it's a 1.4 second route with just 1 point in your W. So it's not instant, so it's not great at protecting you. If like a Kha'Zix shows up or a Rengar shows up out of nowhere to kill your ADC, it's going to be too slow. But in kind of the early game, especially with those ganks, just to have that guaranteed there's no way you're getting around this engage, if you just run up on somebody and then follow their flash, is really, really nice. And you can bait people pretty well with that too. If you do, Mantra W, it can heal you for 40% of your missing health as well, which is really nice. So she has basically a good combination of rotations, speed, great with stuff like Darius, Set, all those types of champs, good poke, but then also like really good shielding and protection later on in the game. So she's really, really strong with a lot of the other champs that are going on right now if you have a push poke comp, or if you have that hard engage comp where you just want to run at people and start the fight. So kind of like Lulu, she can be a bit weaker if you get poked out early on. And she can get out scaled later. She doesn't have a steroid in her kit, so whereas Lulu hands out that 80 basically on hit damage and the 45% attack speed and all that stuff, Karma doesn't have that, so she doesn't give anyone extra attack speed or attack damage or whatever, but it's the mobility and it's the early game aggression and poke, and particularly the wave clear. People underestimate that a lot, but that can be really, really good on her in the right circumstances. So, yeah, I think she is going to be really, really good. And those are the two that I think, especially if you're Diamond Plus out there watching, those are two that I would really keep an eye on because I think that those could potentially be competitively viable. I know that some people have been messing around with Karma, and historically those two have been viable. Lulu in Pro has been played more in top or mid when she's good. So she almost never makes it as a support because when she's good as support, then she's good in the other roles as well. Karma's very similar too. And that's very dangerous in Pro when you can flex something from support to mid or to top sometimes. And that's why those champs usually get buffed nerfed historically. But I think there might be some positions where you would want to play them in higher elo brackets. Okay, Soraka I think is the most powerful one. I think she has the least utility, but I think she has the most raw power of any of the enchanters out there. Just because her heal is on such a low cooldown. It's 2 seconds. It's a 240 base heal, and then they did an interesting change to Soraka as well, to where it no longer costs you health as long as you hit your Q first. It starts off costing you very, very little health, only 20% of what it used to, and then it scales all the way up to being free. So what that means is later on in team fights, whenever you get that maxed out, your W at level 9 or level 10, when you hit a Q in team fights, previously, before the recent changes to Soraka over the last 6 patches or so, you would hurt yourself for 10% of your max HP. So if you had 1500 HP, you do 5 heals in a fight, all of a sudden you're taking 750 true damage, right? So that's a lot. That's 50% of your HP. It's rough. But now you get to keep that. So you do 5 heals in a fight, you're still going to have 1500 HP. So that effectively gives her hundreds and hundreds of extra HP and makes her a lot more difficult to kill. In addition to Guardian being very strong on her right now, and Swiftness being very strong on her right now. So I think that she's in a very good position. She's a lot harder to kill than people think, because with the Guardian, if you take Barrier, which is what I recommend on her, you have your ult to heal you for 1 billion if you're under 40%. You have your Q to self-heal you up. Usually you get Redemption as well. So, unless the other team is just like super fed, it's going to be extremely difficult to burst through you. So that's really nice. She also has some of the best harassment in the laning phase because your Q is virtually free. It's like 40 mana. You can spam it all day. You can push that backline just like Karma can. You can Q the backline, push it up if you want to, try to harass under tower. And it's just so demoralizing. Anytime you hit a Q on the enemy, it just resets the lane. You're going to heal your ADC up, probably to full. You're going to be healed up. And you just win all of these attrition little poke wars against other stuff like Lulu, like Karma, like Janna, like Yuumi. A lot of times, as long as you're hitting your Qs, you're gonna, eventually pressure them down, and a lot of times you're gonna outscale if you don't get caught. So that's the thing, is she is a lot more vulnerable to ganks than Lulu or Karma because she has no way to speed herself. Well, she can speed herself up with her Q, but it's not as reliable, especially at top higher end elo. People will flash the Q. It is going to be she is a lot less safe, and she has a lot less utility, so she doesn't have any real CC. She does have her silence, which is clutch, but it's not the same as a Lulu 2.25 second polymorph. So she does have some tools in her toolkit. She is the highest single target sustained healer, so if you do have those tanks, those 2 or 3 tanks, especially something that has a Spirit Visage like a Zac, because the 30% extra healing from Spirit Visage also applies to healing from other people like a Soraka. It's just going to be almost impossible. If she has a front line protecting her, she's going to outscale. She's going to beat everyone up. Now, someone like Lulu can potentially outscale if you have something like a mega carry, like a Kog'Maw or a Twitch, who gets grievous wounds, and the Soraka person has like an Ezreal who just doesn't do as much sustained teamfight damage. If that Kog'Maw has proper protection, or the Vayne, or the Jinx, or just any like hyperscaler, you can actually blast through Soraka healing, but it is a bit trickier. So in a lot of situations, I think that Soraka is really strong. Another really powerful thing about Soraka is that her ult is global, so you can basically roam anytime you want. It's the same premise that made Karthus really good in the jungle, is that you can influence fights across the map and completely turn lanes without ever leaving your lane. So that means you don't have to put yourself in danger rotating up and down the river, and you're not missing as much experience trying to roam up and down the river to look for plays and to help people out. So usually she's going to be a bit higher in experience, and you can take Ulti Hunter and get those assists stacked up really early, which allows you to cast more ults and get more assists, have a lower cooldown, get more gold, All that stuff is really, really powerful. So I do think that Soraka is super strong, but you have to make sure they don't have a lot of hard engage. And that you're going to have proper protection. Because if your team's rocking like a double assassin comp, you've got a Kha'Zix in the jungle, and you've got like a Talon mid, then it's going to be a lot weaker because they're not going to be able to protect you as much, and fights are going to be really fast. So they're either going to kill somebody, or and if they one-shot somebody, you weren't really needed anyways, or they're going to blow up the Talon, chain CC the Talon, and blow them up even if you heal them, because they're going to have such low HP and they're going to have no resistances. So she's kind of the most extreme example of you really, really want tanks on your team if you have a Soraka. Like, Lulu and Karma can play a lot better with something like a Talon Kha'Zix type of comp, because Kha'Zix can jump in there and then Lulu just buffs them up with a huge, knock up with her R, allows them to stick, can polymorph, can do all that stuff. She can speed them up with the W to run in there with like a Darius or a Set. Soraka doesn't have any of those speed ups, right? She can't help the Darius get in. She can't help him engage. Her heal is really close range. It's like 450, I believe. So sometimes it's dangerous if someone kind of YOLO 1v9s. You can't really go up and heal him. Versus with Lulu, you can at least throw an ult on him from like 1,000 range away to maybe influence the fighter. Same thing with Karma. Karma has 800 range on her shield. You can do an empowered shield, a mantra'd shield on somebody, and maybe that's enough to save them. If it's not, you can probably still escape. So Soraka is just sometimes not as good with the YOLO queue if everyone's constantly running around making stupid plays. It can be a little tougher, but she does have the ult, for the global to help out sometimes with that. So she just has a little bit less utility and a little bit more raw power, and she gets hurt the worst by Grievous Wounds. So whereas Lulu and Karma, the shield is not affected by Grievous Wounds, really nothing in their kit is affected until you get Redemption. Soraka does suffer. I just think that she can function if they have Grievous Wounds, but it's certainly going to make it a lot harder in clutch situations if the game is close, if you have Grievous Wounds. So, anyway, Soraka is definitely going to be a bit more susceptible to that. And remember, everyone's going to have Grievous Wounds because of just all the healing everywhere, so you can't sneak in and hope they don't notice you. They're going to be getting Grievous Wounds for the Kayn or the Aatrox or whatever anyways, so. But I still think she's pretty good. Okay, Yuumi's the next one, and Yuumi is definitely going to be a little bit more controversial in that I know she was just nerfed on this patch. I know that her win rate is not that great. It's only 47%. Now, it was like 49%, so it's not like she fell 8% off of those nerfs. But you definitely do feel it, The mana, you just can't. You have to be very, very prudent with how you're using your mana. You can't just spam the heal on people anymore. And so she can, if you do take some bad trades in the laning phase, it can be rough. If you get blasted by, your ADC gets blasted by a mantra'd Q into like an Ezreal combo and gets dropped down to like 20%, you're going to have a hard time picking him up. It's going to take your entire mana bar to do that early on. So she is a lot more susceptible to poke than she used to be. And you can't really speed people around the map as much as you used to, because before the mana cost changes, you could just run the Darius or the Garen or whoever, just spam it running around the map. Hold on just 1 second. Hey dear, can you take this from Denny? I'm recording a video right now. Just calling him back here in a second. Sorry about that. That was a call from our realtor, but obviously I'm in the middle of recording, so I'll just have my wife take that call, and then she can relay that information over to me. So yeah, it is harder to just spam your heal, to rotate people around the map, to deal with poke, but she's still going to be really good in team fights. Obviously you still can't target her, still can't kill her. Hi, Rory. Okay, I'll be done in just a little bit. So she still does all the same stuff. She functions basically the same way in 5v5 team fights. As long as you get a kill or an assist every couple of heals, you're going to have enough juice to make it through the fight, right? It's just in those really long fights, sometimes against other enchanters like a Soraka, if the fights are going on for like 20 seconds and nobody's dying, then it can get kind of rough. But she still also has not only the healing, the speed up increase, the attack speed increase, so she does very well with Ardent Censer as well, just like Lulu does. But she also has the AoE, like Sona-esque type of ult that has a 1.75 root that's like a massive hitbox. So she still brings a ton to the table. I still think she's very good in the right hands, but You have to be very well practiced, and I would say you would not want to blind pick her. You probably want to pick her last and get some good visibility of, you know, what the enemy team comp's going to be before you break her in. But I think in the right situation, she can be good. And you can see that here. It's like, yeah, the number on the face of it is 47%, but like really good Yuumi players that play her a lot can get it up to 57%. So in the right situations, she can be good. And she is harder to play than people think she is. You know, making those decisions about the mana, not getting caught up in stupid stuff, and YOLO queuing. It's like, okay, my jungler's about to dive the tower. That's really dumb. We're going to die. You have to have the courage to just jump off, mute the pings on that guy who's going to spam ping you, and just walk away and don't die. Okay, and that's hard to do sometimes as Yuumi, right? It's hard to do with anybody, but especially with Yuumi, because if you're doing a stupid dive like that, you're going down. You know, with someone like Janna or Karma or whatever, you can throw a shield on that jungler doing something stupid because you have a lot of range and maybe get away, but you're not getting away, right, with Yuumi. So in those small skirmishes where people are doing stupid stuff, that's primarily why she gets the low win rate, is that people overstay, people commit to dumb fights with people, you know, with their teammates, and then they just can't escape, and they die a lot, and they lose. But if you're making prudent decisions, especially in a 5v5 team comp, you're going to have the protection, you're going to have the tanks, you're going to have the hyperscaler, then I still think she can be good. So it's basically like if you want Lulu, but a little bit safer, and you want to make sure that you have that AoE CC to layer together with stuff like a Mumu or Misfortune or something like that, then Yuumi can be very good. She still is probably the premier enchanter if you have a fed bruiser, particularly Darius. Ultra strong with Darius because of the healing and also the movement speed that she can put in there. And you can guarantee if he stays up, he's going to get you some kills, right? So he's going to get your mana refunded. So I think in the right kind of comp, she can still be really good, but she is dangerous. At higher elo, like pro play, I still think she's going to be, if you're playing an enchanter, probably the go-to enchanter. Although, once again, Lulu and Karma could be in that mix pretty soon as well. Okay, Janna is the last one in tier 1 here that I'll mention, and she's kind of your premier disengaged enchanter, so she can't help the Darius and the Set and stuff like that run in, but she can protect your team from those types of champs. So if you do have something like, you know, a Kog'Maw on your team that you want to protect from a bunch of people running at them, or if you have a bunch of poke stuff on your team, you got a Xerath, you got a Vel'Koz, they don't want to run in, they just want to poke. Or if you have something like a really good split pusher like a Fiora on your team who's running in one of the side lanes, and you just need to make sure that the enemy doesn't hard engage on your team. They have a, you know, Leona and a Mumu or something like that, and you just need to try to, you know, hold down the fort in the mid lane while someone else split pushes, then she's going to be really good. So she's very good with like poke comps or split pick comps. She's also very fast, so that does allow her with her W, and if you take Boots of Swiftness or Mobility Boots, you can rotate up to help the split pusher and then rotate back to help your team. And that also does give you really good vision control too, because you're so fast, you have very good disengage. You can go like ward some of the more dangerous areas potentially and get out of it if you find somebody with your tornado or your ultimate. So she has good vision control for an enchanter. She has great rotational speed for an enchanter. So she's just really good at kind of the YOLO queue where you have either split pushers or assassins running around trying to do stuff. Her shield does give a lot of flat AD as well instead of attack speed. So you might give your Talon, for example, 50 AD or 60 AD, which is a huge difference in their all-in. That's like over 2,000 AD. So that's going to really help your Zed or your Talon or some other AD assassin just pop and blow people up. What's up?
How much time are you doing this?
Probably like 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
He found someone who can do it today. I just
Okay.
need to call him back.
Okay, yeah.
Schedule a time.
All right, hit him up.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I think that she's pretty good in those style of comps. Now, she can have a harder time against Lulu and Karma in lane. They'll probably be able to outpressure her, although a lot of people do take like Comet, Taste of Blood, Scorch, and things like that to help shore up Janna's early game. One of the big problems with her early is that her shield's like an 18-second cooldown, so if you're going for trades early, you're probably going to be getting your W. That means your shield is going to be really weak, and it's on a super long cooldown. So that's rough, versus someone like Lulu who can just, you know, max out her shield, and that is both her offensive ability for poke most of the time in the laning phase, and it's also her defensive ability. later on. So Lulu, you know, and it's an 8 seconds. At level 1, it's an 8-second shield on Lulu versus Janna's like 18 seconds. And they basically shield for the same amount. But Lulu can also use hers offensively. And it gives the AD carry an extra like 30 on hit damage in the early levels. So Lulu's just going to be a lot better at those type of trades probably early on. And even Karma is just going to outrange you, and she can get 3 points in her Q, and especially her mantra Q is just going to hit like a truck because you don't have a heal. So if you take a really bad trade with a mantra Q plus the ADC doing anything, it's going to be tough. So Janna does scale really well. She is very good, like I said, in the YOLO Q, the split comps, the poke comps. She's good at a lot of the stuff that like Lulu and Karma are not good at. So I think of Janna, you can play her and she's fine in any comp. You can make her work. But I would think of her right now in this meta as probably being more of a situational pick, a very, very good situational pick. But I would probably want to see a bit more visibility on the enemy comp or visibility on your comp. If people are hovering and you know you're going to have the type of comp I was just talking about, then maybe you could go ahead and pick her. But she's just a little bit more situational than the other ones. But I do think that she is really strong, and that is reflected in her win rate. You know, she still has one of the premier win rates. Okay, so I think that, you know, all of these ladies are going to be where you're at, just some variation of the same thing, Ardent Sensor 2.0. But let's talk about a little bit of the tier 2s before we move on here. So I knocked Rakan down to tier 2. I do think that he is still really strong. If you're a Rakan one-trick or you play him a ton, I think he is still very good in this meta. But Rakan does have a couple of things going against him. Number one, his, like, trading in lane is not very good. Right, so his Q is going to be pretty weak compared to stuff like Lulu and Karma. You do have the potential to all-in him if you hit him with a W, but you really need to be level 3 before you can have a good trade. Like, you need to W them, Q them, and then shield back, and it's just not going to be as much damage as some of the other all-in champs, so it's not really enough to threaten them in the early game in most comps, especially if you have something like a Vayne or an Ezreal on your team. If you have something like a Draven, that might be enough to kill him, but it is kind of tricky, and so you have that problem early on. He is very good with his engage later on, but some of these champs, it's just so hard to kill on the engage now because they're going to have the Guardian, you know, they might have Barrier, they're going to have all this other stuff that I keep talking about, so it's just really hard to blow them up, even if you do get a hold of them in the early game. And you're seeing more and more like AD carries taking Exhaust or Enchanters taking Exhaust. They'll have like heal plus Exhaust. If they have a really good scaling comp, or Barrier plus Exhaust, or just something like that, to where it's just going to be very difficult to get on top of them. Now, he can get Zeke's plus Ardent Sensor, so he can keep up in scaling, at least for a little bit, with a couple of those champs, but he just doesn't have anything else that buffs the AD carry, right? So he doesn't have the Lulu attack speed, or the Yuumi attack speed, or the Janna raw AD. He doesn't hand out the extra movement speed to help your Darius stick to people like Karma does. So he is still really good if you land those good engages, if you have the shields, if you get some good roams off. He is still probably the most versatile jack of all trades enchanters out there because he can operate as the full-on engage, but you don't need that as much with a lot of the champs out there, right? You don't need the engage if you have Nunu, Volibear, Darius, Wukong, all of that stuff. You know, Karma, like just putting a speed up on somebody, or Lulu speeding somebody up, that can be very, very similar to what Rakan's trying to do. So it's just that they, in a lot of comps, they can still get on you, they can still engage, so that's not a problem. You don't need it from the support role as much, and they're just going to outscale you a lot of times. So he can still be very good. I do like him, but that is just one of the problems. I like him over other engaged champs just because he does have the option to get the Ardent, to get the Zekes, to get things like a Shirelias. So he can get a Shirelias and help the Darius get in there, and I do get that a lot. But some of the ladies can do that just a little bit better. You're basically on the clock. If it gets to 2 or 3 items, if they get Ardent Sensor plus Athene's plus Redemption, it's probably lights out. So it's just kind of tough out there. But I do like him over the Leona and the Nautilus right now, just because he's kind of half Enchanter, half Engage. So he doesn't get outshined as fast as some of the other ones do. Now, Sona's one who does have a really high win rate right now. In fact, it is just a little bit higher than some of the other ones that I mentioned, but I think she is the most dangerous of all of the mainstream enchanters that I'm talking about, just because she doesn't have any personal protection. and her W is really dinky early on. It's just like a 35 heal. Now, it can heal 2 people if your ADC is going up and actually trading with you, actually landing auto attacks, pressing abilities, and things like that. It can be a pretty good one. If you're fully using the shield on both people and you're fully using the heal, you know, paying 80 mana at level 1, I think it's like maybe 75 after the rebate, in order to get a combination of 120 healing and 120 shielding, that can be pretty good. But what happens in reality a lot of times is your ADC just sits there and watches you while you're harassing, and if you're just healing yourself for 35, or even with the shield, if you're actively taking a trade and shielding yourself, you're paying 80 mana for like a 70 shield or something, which is pretty bad. So you're going to get blasted on mana before your first back. Once you get a couple of fairy charms, it's not as bad, but it's pretty rough early on. Now, she does stack Spell Thieves really well early on. She does have nice range on her Q, so if you do take Airy plus Scorch, which is really common, just off of those runes and just spamming the Q, even if you don't go into auto attack range, I think the Q range is like 1,000. It's like 900 to 1,000, and it's point click. You can do it through minions, so you can stack all that up really well. But she does have a lot more mana problems than any of the other enchanters in the early game. She does scale really well late game, though. You can speed your team up with the E. You can get everyone to run in, kind of like Karma. It's not as fast as Karma's is, and it requires a little bit more like grouping up and positioning on the part of your team, but you do have that. You do quite a lot of damage with the Q spam and auto attack. She's one of the best Athene's users out there, just because it's always going to be refilled. It's on a low cooldown, your Q is, and your W is also on a fairly low cooldown, so you can distribute that Athene's healing really well. And you do have the big ult, right, that has the, AoE 1.5 second stun. So she is very good in team fighting. I just think, to me personally, she just seems a little bit more vulnerable, even than something like a Soraka, because Soraka's Q heals her and gives her a pretty good chunk of extra movement speed that she can use to run away, and she has the silence on top of that to make it a little more difficult to jump on her, versus, Sona is pretty much like, you just press your E and run away and hope they don't kill you. A lot of times you can, slightly more advanced Sona play, you can make sure that you always hit the green shot on somebody, which does reduce their damage by like 25 or 30% for a few seconds. So that is really good. Or you can slow people down with the E. So she does have some utility. She's got some power in there, but basically one of the highest personal damage output enchanters out there, who scales really well in team fights if you have the protection. I just think she's a bit more vulnerable, so that's why I have her lower down the chart, but she can still be really strong. Doesn't have anything that buffs up your AD carry, so it doesn't have the Lulu buff or the Yuumi or the Janna, so that is kind of rough, but and does require you to be like close to people. That's one of the biggest differences. Karma can shield that Darius from 800 units away and help him, run down to finish off a kill, versus Sona with her E, yeah, it speeds you up, but you have to be, I think the radius on that is like maybe 400, maybe 450 on your aura. It's very close. So you have to be really close to them, which sometimes you're just not going to be able to get there fast enough to help them out. Or in team fights, if you're trying to make sure everyone's getting touched by your auras, you might leave yourself really vulnerable to AoE stuff, right? So you could get hit by an Amumu ult, eat too much of a Misfortune ult, Rumble ult, get trapped in a Jarvan ult, that type of stuff. So she is a little bit more vulnerable because she's so close range and she just doesn't have as many defensive tools. But I still think that she is really good, and I recommend her to a lot of newer players too, because she's very, very easy to execute. Virtually no skill shots, it's only your R, and that means that you can free your mind up to pay attention to the mini-maps. And sometimes people think, oh, stupid champions, or like simple champions for stupid people, right? And it's like, if you're bad, play Malzahar, play Sona, play Garen. That's not necessarily the case, though. The thing is, it frees up your mind when you're learning the game so that you can pay attention to other stuff. So you can pay attention to the mini-map, make intelligent decisions on roaming, warding, press tab, make intelligent decisions, communicate stuff with your team, ping stuff, dragons coming up in 1 minute. Ping stuff like, hey, mid's missing, they might be roaming top lane, watch out. So when your mind is not, constantly hyper-focused on landing difficult skill shots or making difficult decisions, then you can do other stuff. So it can be very smart, especially if you're learning a champion or if you're newer to the game, to play simpler champs so you can focus on those fundamentals a lot more. Because if you're playing Thresh, if you just started the game and you're an Iron and you're playing Thresh, you're going to be focused so much on, okay, I got to like try to hit this hook skill shot. I got to try to time my flay just perfectly when they engage. And you just kind of tunnel vision in there, you know, and you're not paying attention to what's going on in your mini map. And that can be devastating, right? Because you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to convey really useful information to your team. So there's no shame in playing Sona. I've played Sona quite a lot, no problem. I'm Diamond 4 right now. I have no quarrels, or no qualms, I guess, playing things like Sona. Or Soraka is also on the easier end, although Sona is a bit easier, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a win's a win. It doesn't matter if you get the win playing Yasuo or you get the win playing Sona. You're going to get the LP either way. So don't be afraid to play a champ if you're really trying to look to win, just because it's simple. Speaking of pretty simple champs, we have Blitzcrank up next, and we'll go through these last ones in the next just really quickly, because I don't want this video to go over an hour, ideally. But Blitzcrank, very one-dimensional, but his one dimension is really good in this meta right now. Sometimes. It's good against the enchanters in this meta, we'll put it that way, where you just hook somebody and you blow them up. He has one of the few anti-shield abilities in the game. His ultimate completely removes shields and then does its damage. So if you hook somebody and Karma Mantra shields them for 800, and then you ult them, then you're getting rid of the 800 shield, and you're doing like 400 damage on top of that. So you just melt right through shields, murder people. Very good against Karma, Lulu, Janna, who are all really popular right now. So, and the thing about Blitz's hook is it's the longest range hook. It goes over walls, and he has a lot of base damage built into his kit. That hook does like 300 damage when you get it maxed out. And your ultimate is on a very low cooldown and also does like 300 damage. And both of those have a 1.0 AP ratio if you want to try to get some AP on him. I'm not entirely sure you'd want to do that, but if you want to try like a GLP or Twin Shadows or something like that, just to slow people down, get a higher probability hook, you can do that. Most people do tanky stuff like Aftershock, which is fine. But yeah, Blitzcrank is the best hook champion in the game in terms of like just the hook. It's also a huge hitbox, and it's fast without a delay. So if you think about Thresh, for example, it's a really slender hitbox. It does not pull them all the way over to you. It just pulls them, you know, like 300 units towards you, and then you have to go on to them, which makes you more vulnerable. Versus Blitz just pulls them all the way over and has a much bigger hitbox. And Thresh also has a half a second delay where he winds up and they have time to dodge. Blitz doesn't have that. It's just like, boom, there's the hook. You know, so he's really good if you land those hooks a lot, especially against the champs that have a hard time moving around like a Soraka. If you kill the person Yuumi's attached to, obviously you get Yuumi for free on top of that. So he can be very good. Now, I will say that more and more enchanters are realizing just how strong Boots of Swiftness are, and if you have Boots of Swiftness, you're playing something like a Karma or a Lulu, stuff that can speed up, it is a lot harder to hit those hooks, especially at higher elos. So be aware of that, but if you do land those hooks, he's really good. The problem is he just doesn't do anything else, right? So he's very good at the hooks, but the rest of his kit is very, very dinky. It just doesn't offer as much versatility as someone like a Nautilus, a Leona. He's going to have way less CC than they do, especially in team fights. So he's really just, you pick, you get squishy people. Now, I will say I do have him down a little bit lower and not tier 1, whereas some other people might have him higher, just because, once again, the tanks are coming back too. If you're hooking Darius into your team, sometimes that's a bad idea when the enemy team also has a Lulu. So, you know, you hook Darius in, Lulu ults, knocks everybody up, and then Darius just kills everyone. Or the same thing with Garen, or hooking Wukong into your team, or Volibear. Like, it's going to be really hard to blow them up, especially if the enemy team has an enchanter, and that can actively be really bad. if you like pull the Darius right next to your ADC, for example, and he grabs them. So good against enchanters, but not so good against a lot of the top laners and junglers that are becoming increasingly popular right now. So very good at what he does. You just need to make sure that that's what you want in the game. So I would probably wait and use him as a counter pick. He's still also not that great against, you know, Leona and Nautilus, who are still pretty popular picks, right? If you look on the most popular picks right now, you're still seeing Nautilus. Leona's a little bit further down. He's still good to hook Thresh, because you can blow Thresh up. Thresh is actually a lot squishier than people think, but just be careful with the Blitzcrank. If you're a god on him, if you land all your hooks, he's pretty much always a good pick, but he's really risky. Okay, Senna's another one that I have up in tier 2. I think that she is probably the best, or certainly one of the best harassment champions in the early game. She has really long range with her auto attacks, with her Q, her W can lock people down. And she just gets a lot of free stats. If you're constantly harassing, then you're going to be able to get a bunch of free AD, which helps you scale into the mid game very, very well. You have a global ult. And a lot of people have been doing this kind of Grasp of the Undying plus Frozen Mallet build, which just kind of doubles down on the early game. Grasp gives you more poke, gives you heal, allows you to get some extra health, which makes you a little bit more resilient against all-in champs. I just think that it's really bad later on in the game. Like, I understand that it's good early, and that's kind of reflected in her chart here, too, if you see that. Like, she does have this huge sort of power spike around 20 to 25 minutes, at about 20 minutes, and that's really during the laning phase. Once she gets leveled up a little bit, gets some more stacks on the AD, and she starts really hitting, that's when she starts going off. But then after that, she starts falling off hard. And the main reason for that, I believe, is that's when enchanters start completing their second item, is around like that 25-minute mark, the 20 to 25. That's when the Lulu is going to get Ardent Censer plus Athenes. And it's just going to have more levels on their spells. And you're just going to get shanked if the game goes really long a lot of times. So she's got the damage. She has the poke in the early game. Really good with something like a Caitlyn or something like an Ezreal who has that long range, who has that poke. I would just rather play something like Karma instead, who's also going to scale really well later on in the game and has a similar level of poke. But she can be really good, especially if you need some AD. Maybe you have an AP jungler and an AP top laner. You need some AD on your team, some extra AD. I think she can be a good option. And once again, if you're heavy poke, all in on the early game, Caitlyn, Ezreal, maybe Jhin, stuff like that, I think that she can be really strong. So, good, but just kind of be careful. And then Bard I have down here just a little bit lower. He does have a high win rate. To me, he requires a lot of practice to perform really well on him. He's very short range. He's only 500 range, so it can be risky to walk up and auto attack people. Against other fairly short range stuff like Lulu, he can perform pretty well. He does have a pretty decent heal if you fully charge those shrines in the laning phase. He does roam really well. You just have to get used to him. And his itemization, he sort of falls off hard as the game goes on too, I believe, right? Yeah. Now, not as fast and not as much like a rock like Senna clearly does, but he kind of ramps up the entire time up to 25 or 20 minutes or so, and then starts falling off after that. And it's the same thing as Senna. He has a lot of like really high base damage in his kit, and he has a passive that ends up giving him a bunch of free stats, free damage. Senna has the souls, Bard has the meeps. And so they're really good in the early game before people get items and before they get a lot of points in their spells. But as the game goes on, he gets a lot weaker. Like, more points in your R really doesn't do that much to enhance the spell. It lowers the cooldown, but that's it. It doesn't do any damage. Your E is the same thing. Like, multiple points in E, it's like, okay, lower cooldown, you move through the tunnel a little bit faster, but no extra damage, no extra healing. Most of the time your W, you're just casting on people directly. So it's like, it's okay. But he just falls off hard just because he's not that good with runes or items out there. It's just kind of that baseline power that he gets off of his passive and really maximizing that early game and then snowballing later on off of the roaming. So he can be really good, but he just requires you to be very proactive, and he requires your team to be on point and try to close out the game, which is not always a good bet if you're playing in silver, gold, bronze, and iron. So anyways, he can be really good, but you got to be on point, you got to be focused, and you got to close out the game quickly if you want to play him. And then finally, Tier 3, just in the last minute or so, I think that Leona is still really good, has one of the best premier engages in the game. She can go through minions, which is really nice. You have your ult, good, long range, 90-second cooldown, one of the shortest cooldown hard engage in the game. Very good. So she's great if you're snowballing. If you're ahead, then she's almost impossible to get away from, and she can just keep killing people like Lulu, like Janna, who don't have a blink to get out of her ult. She can just keep killing them over and over again. So that's good. The problem with her is she has no escape, and she has to go all the way in over to them. So if you get camped by the jungler or the enemy's just able to turn around the fight, you're probably going to die, right? And there are so many ways to mitigate her engage with Guardian, Swifty Boots, make it a lot harder to hit your E on people. So that is pretty tough. And you require very specific wave positioning. You need the wave in the middle of the lane so that you can get a proper engage. And that's the same thing with Nautilus. With Blitzcrank, you can hook people under tower. With Thresh, you can hook people under tower. Pyke, you can hook people under tower. But with Nautilus and Leona, because they go all the way over to them, that's off the table. So if your ADC is just kind of mindlessly pushing into the tower over and over again, then you're going to have a really hard time engaging, and sometimes it's hard to communicate people or convince people that like how they should be doing the minions, how they should be managing the waves in a silver game, right? They're going to say, shut up, I do what I want, right? Or just ignore you a lot of times. So it just requires very careful wave positioning and really high quality engage. Your team also has to actually follow up. You know, when you go in as Leona, if they just sit there and look at you, you're probably going to die. And you have to make good decisions on that. So, you know, maybe you're thinking, hey, I want to go in, we can pick this person off, but you don't have good vision and you're not like really paying attention to where other people are on the map. You know, you go in for an engage and all of a sudden 3 people come out of the bush. Well, that was a really bad engage. You might say, well, I didn't know they were there. It's like, well, you should have suspected it, or you should have had better vision to see it. So it just requires, I think, a lot more stuff to go right to play something like a Nautilus or a Leona. They feel really OP if you're good and you're constantly forcing fights over and over again and being very proactive. They feel really OP and really strong, and that's why, you know, a lot of the tier lists and the all caps videos out there really love Leona and Nautilus, because it's like you can pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Oh, sorry, my camera's freaking out. I don't know. I don't know how to... Well, let me see. If I just turn it off and turn it back on, maybe that'll fix it. I don't know when that started going on, but... it was doing that yesterday. Hopefully it's not dying. Maybe it's just a problem with OBS. I don't know. Anyways, so she can be good, but requires a bit more coordination, a bit more intelligence on the part of your team, a bit more game sense, game knowledge, both for you and for your allies. So that can be a problem. Versus if you're playing something like, you know, Lulu, she just kind of works, right? You know, if you speed up the Darius and he doesn't go in, okay, whatever. You're going to have your speed up again in another few seconds. No biggie, you didn't die. Nobody died, right? A lot of times. And, it's a lot less risky to play the enchanters if you're positioning well and not dying to assassins and things like that. You just don't have to put yourself at risk, you know, and you can go up and help people like I was talking about earlier. One of the problems with Yuumi a lot of times is someone's trying to YOLO dive towers and things like that. You know, if you're a Leona and you try to help them dive the tower, or they're just making a really stupid engage, they're chasing someone through the enemy jungle, you're a Leona, you're a Nautilus, you go in there, you try to help, you're going to die, right? Because you're not going to get out most of the time. Versus like a Lulu or a Janna, you can at least throw them a shield and like maybe they trade a kill before they die. At a bare minimum, you're not going to die. You're a lot less likely to die if you try to help somebody who's doing something stupid in solo queue, which happens a lot. So doing something misinformed. We won't be too rude there, but anyways. So Leona, Nautilus, kind of in the same boat. I have Leona up a bit more just because I think she does snowball harder. She can engage through minion waves, and she has a lower cooldown on her ult. But Nautilus is still really good, great in team fights, ton of CC. Get Gargoyle, Stoneplate on both of them. They're going to do a lot of work for you in clean 5v5s. They just get outscaled by enchanters at 2 to 3 items between 20 to 25 minutes. So you really got to close the door quickly and get out of the game. Nami I have a bit lower just because her numbers are just weak. She's been nerfed over time. She does apply a lot of pressure in the lane, but you really do have to close early if you're against something like a Lulu or a Janna or really any of those other enchanters, just because she has longer cooldowns on her abilities. She only has 1 heal. She does have CC. She's got her bubble. She's got her ult, which is nice, but with Swifties, people are going to be able to dodge that stuff a lot easier, and it's just harder to all-in and blow people up earlier on in the game for the reasons that I mentioned. So she is good, but I think some of the other enchanters are a bit stronger right now. Pyke did get a couple of buffs on this patch, which I thought were going to help him out a lot more, but it seems like, at least statistically, they're not yet. But she does offer Pyke does offer really hard snowballing. Just his items are a little bit expensive outside of Umbral Glaive, and because there's so much healing and mobility, people are going to be able to dash or just, you know, run away from you before you can ult them. They're going to heal. You know, you're going to try to go up and, you know, execute that cane, and then out of nowhere, he's just going to heal for like half of his health, and you're not going to get the execute off. So it's just kind of rough out there with Pyke with so many enchanters. Now, his ult does go through shields, which is really nice. If someone's at like 200 HP and Karma puts a 1000 shield on him, it's not going to matter because you're going to execute through the shield. So that is very good. But because a lot of the shield champions are also running Athenes, that means when Karma puts that 1000 shield on him, she's probably going to Athenes heal him for 300, and that might put him out of execute range. So it's just kind of tough out there the way the meta's shaking out. If you do get hooks, kind of like with Blitzcrank, if you do get hooks over and over again on the Lulu, the Karma, the Janna, stuff like that, you can snowball the game, but he just doesn't do as much like just raw like burst damage as the Blitzcrank does, and he doesn't remove the shields like Blitzcrank does as well. So He is good. He does roam really well. You can make some really good plays in the mid lane or the jungle, but the fact that there are a lot more sort of tanks in the jungle makes it harder to kill the junglers. So he's okay. I just think the meta's working against him a little bit. But if you're really good and you snowball hard on him, you can make him work. Zyra is the last one that I'll mention here. She is going to be strong, but you know, once again, you're opting into a very snowball-reliant champ. Your items are expensive. You do fall off. Once the enchanter gets 2 or 3 items, they're going to outscale you. It's the same story over and over again with a lot of these champs in Tier 2 and Tier 3. But you do have really good poke. You do have nice all-in. It's just harder if they have Guardian, if they have Bone Plating, you know, if the ADC is opting into some defensive stuff. You know, some of them are taking Blade the Ruined King, or some other type of lifesteal in the laning phase. Sometimes they'll even take stuff like a Doran's Shield on someone like a Vayne when they're up against heavy poke or heavy all-in like a Zyra. So she can work. It's just you really need someone like a Draven that's going to double down and really try to kill him in the laning phase. And those champs are just a little bit out of the meta right now. Jhin does work, and he is pretty popular. But if you have something like a Kai'Sa, Vayne, Ezreal, stuff like that, they're just not going to have enough power to help you do what you want to do in the early game, especially if they're just standing behind you, just trading CS. They're not pressuring. They're not pushing up. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot in Gold and Silver is you're just kind of up there harassing by yourself, which if you're against a Leona or a Nautilus, that can be fine because you probably will outscale those champions. So she's good into those picks, particularly stuff like Blitzcrank and Nautilus. You can use your plants to block hooks, so that is really handy. Thresh, she murders Thresh, so good matchup into Thresh if you want that. But if you want to play her, I would highly recommend her as a counter pick to some of those champs. Just make sure they don't have an enchanter. And she's also kind of bad at the YOLO Q, just running around because she wants to get Sork boots. She doesn't have any movement speed buffs, so you can get picked off by assassins while you're trying to rotate. And just her skill shots are very slow and have slender hitboxes, so you really want to be counter-engaging when they engage onto you, or you want to be picking people off out of the brush and stuff like that. So she's not really good if you're just constantly running around to, you know, goofy fight after goofy fight, Clown Fiesta style. She's not as good with that style of play. And also the fact there are so many tanks out there, like I just mentioned before, and the fact that Death's Dance is so popular, it's really, really good against Zyra because you get magic resist, and you get delayed damage, and you get lifesteal out of it. So, and Spirit Visage is also really popular on a lot of champs. So if they have Death's Dance and Spirit Visage, you're just never going to kill the Volibear or the Nunu or the Kayn. Nunu's not going to get Spirit Visage or Death's Dance, but anyway, it's just a little bit too much, plus healing and shielding. You can get Morellonomicon for it, but it's tough out there for Zyra. So if you're really good with her earlier, if you're duoed with a Draven or a Jhin you can trust that's going to put pressure on the lane, she can work, but otherwise it's kind of tough. Anyways, and Brand down in the honorable mentions is very similar. It's just kind of who you want. Brand has the potential to get the stun and the all-in, maybe a little bit better than Zyra. It's questionable, but he doesn't have as much vision control with the plants. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much. We did go over an hour a little bit, but I did also have a meta-analysis in there, so let me know what you think about this format. I was trying to, you know, just go through as many different champions as I could. I think I spent more time on different champions this time at least. But yeah, let me know about the format, and thank you very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.